Okay, here we are on chapter 6, which is the director. Now, the director is really kind of a modern idea. It really didn't, the official director didn't happen until the modern era, but actually, there's always got to be somebody in charge. Even in the oldie times, even in ancient Greece, the playwright here was the director. The playwright would make the play, write the play, and basically tell people, learn your lines and don't bump into the furniture. There was also, in the early days, there was a style. Everybody did things the same way, so there wasn't really as much need for a director. There was no making decisions on, well, let's do this modern, or let's do this, let's do this a la, some different style. So basically, there not as many decisions were needed for directing. But typically there was always somebody, some kind of a producer, somebody involved, the money person, who wanted to make sure the thing went well. And in ancient Greece, there was a choragus, who was a producer, or the chorus leaders. You can see the chorus here. So someone had to line those people up and make sure they were, doing what they were supposed to do. So the choreography, because the chorus was a group of people, and once you've got a group of people, somebody's got to run that. So there was somebody in charge there, and the same thing with ancient Rome. It was very similar. Basically, Rome and Greece were somewhat similar. They just called them different names. So the dominus was this troop leader, basically did the kind of the same thing the choragus did in Greece. And then you get to the Renaissance, and all throughout history, early history, there was always a troupe. Again, I think I mentioned the gypsy troupes. Even in Greek and Roman times, the ragtag, musicians and entertainers, the street entertainers, and out of that was a very vital and real. People made a living going around entertaining, taking a wagon around and doing tales and things. But in the Renaissance, there was a troupe leader. The troupe leader. You'd have a group going around from town to town again and playing. And typically it was the lead actor, or it was the playwright. And, Shakespeare himself was an actor, and Shakespeare was on the road as a young man and learned his trade and learned a lot about production, working his way up before he became the playwright that he is. And even as a playwright, he had control with his producer on how the plays were put together. So that was really, the beginnings of directing. There were some great directors also throughout that time. David Garrick in the 1700s was a leading actor, and he was also a fabulous director. So again, there's isolated instances of really good directors early on, but basically we didn't really get to directors until the modern time. So what actually does a director do? Well, that's a good question. Glad you asked that. Let me tell you. Defines what the play is about. It reads the play. This is what the play is about, so this is what we have to do. And from the script, after you read the script, now this is a modern director, after you read the script, how exactly am I going to do it? What is the concept? What am I going to do? And casting the play is very important. One director said, casting the play correctly is 99% of directing. If you get the right actors and the right productions, the right parts, then the play will direct itself. Give the actors freedom, and you've got to rein them in and be an outside, eye for them. But if it's a good actor, they're going to do what you need them to do. Scheduling. Directing is like any kind of a mid-level or even upper-level management job. When I was doing some business interviews, my experience as a director, scheduling, working with the budget, working interpersonal with people, all those are mid-level management skills, mid-level or upper-level management skills. So a director is a position of authority and someone who has to basically run the show and keep everyone from fighting and killing each other. Working with your team of designers. Sometimes in an academic theater, like at Allen, you might be the chief cook and bottle washer. You might be the director and the designer. But in a larger or a university setting, you've got a group of designers to work with, which is great. And then you've got to collaborate, and then you've got to let them see your vision or work with their vision and make it work with yours. So there's a lot of collaboration and interaction. That's one of the fun things about theater, actually. Stages the play, blocks the play, blocks the play. That's a kind of a clunky word, but basically, like an artist painting a picture, you know, the director has to see, you know, what the picture, the stage picture looks like. And if people are all bunched up, or if you can't see people, or people have their back to the audience, or sometimes that's effective, but you know, sometimes, most of the time, you want some kind of visibility. So that's really, you know, the director is the eye shaping, okay, this looks good, or that looks clunky, or we've seen a lot of that, let's move this around and do something different. So basically that's the director's job, is for the visual look of the play. And again, being true to what the playwright wants is what a good director would do. What is the playwright trying to say? Because it all starts, as we looked in chapter, was it chapter 2? It all comes out of the playwright's mind. So how can you bring that to the screen and embellish that and make that look good? So that's really what the director does. And here's a clip of, I mean, a lot of you are familiar with Romeo and Juliet. So here, I'm going to show you two versions. I'm going to show you this version, which is kind of a typical version. This is the opening of the play. And Franco Zeffirelli tried to really create what he thought was as historically accurate a version of Romeo and Juliet as possible. So really tried to stay true to what he thought Shakespeare's original version or vision was. So let me see if I can pull this up. Let's try that. Well, I don't want that. Let's go somewhere else. Let's go to my files. That. Let's go to that. Okay, here we go. This looks like it.
The quarrel is between our masters and us, their men. THE101. Well, here come the house of the Montagues.
Good morning.
Good morning to you, sir.
Quarrel. I will back thee.
Right. Fear me not.
Come. Let's on. Do you bite your thumb at us, sir? I do bite my thumb, sir. Do you bite your thumb at us, sir?
You'll get there.
No, sir. I do not bite my thumb at you, sir. But I do bite my thumb, sir.
Do you quarrel, sir?
Quarrel, sir?
No,
sir.
If you do, sir, I am for you. I serve as good a man as you.
No better?
Yes, better, sir.
You lie.
Draw, if you be men.
All right, and that's how Shakespeare starts his play. Shakespeare loved to start with a fight scene. Why not? It's a good place to start. You know, let's get some action going. So this is the beginning of Romeo and Juliet. There's a fight between the Montagues and the Capulets, and of course it gets broken up. Okay, that's a typical version. That's the typical version. And also notice Zeffirelli's, you know, handling of the actors. The actors are very, you know, you lie, you know, trying to be very realistic. Again, this is film acting, and this is from the 60s, but Zeffirelli was also conscious of, you know, trying to be a good, you know, good realistic acting. So you can do Shakespeare realistically. When that version is pretty good at that. And then the auteur director, think of the word auteur as the author. So here's a director really trying to be the author, basically trying to be the creating. So they're really still taking all the stuff that a regular director does, but they're really controlling it and shaping their particular vision to kind of maybe rewrite, still keep the text, but rewrite it or shape it or radically cut it to kind of create their own personal vision. So Baz Luhrmann is an Australian filmmaker. You might remember him from The Great Gatsby in Australia, but also we did a very famous Romeo and Juliet with Leo DiCaprio and Claire Danes. And Baz Luhrmann came out of the Australian theater. He was a theater director first. And that's also good training for, being creative, because sometimes you have to be creative with, because your budget isn't as great as with a big film budget. But he does this version of Romeo and Juliet, and he wanted to update it. So instead of Verona, he made it like Verona Beach, like sort of this, kind of play. Maybe it's in Florida, maybe it's in, it's vaguely Italian too. So who knows where it is? It's all done without swords. They have guns and modern. So he's trying to bring it to a new audience in this version. And he also kind of, hypes it up, as you can see in this this rendition. Let's see. Let me go back to my tab for this too. Let's try this.
Quarrel is between our masters.
And us, they're men!
Bubble, boiling trouble.
And a pretty piece of flesh I am.
Here comes the House of Capulet. Coral.
I will bite my thumb at them, which is a disgrace to them if they bear it.
Go forth, I will back thee! Do you bite your thumb at us, sir? I do bite my thumb, sir! Do you bite your thumb at us? Sir. Is law on our side if I say aye? No! No, sir, I do not bite my thumb at you, sir, but I bite my thumb, sir! Do you quarrel, sir? Quarrel, sir? No, sir! But if you do, sir, and for you I serve as good a man as you! No, better? Here comes our kinsman, say better! Yes, sir, better! Do I believe me? Poor fools, you don't know what you do!
Okay, so that was quite the little entertaining bit, wasn't it? Okay, also, not only the regular text, but he has double, double, toil and trouble in there, and, some other lines from some other plays. That was from Macbeth, and I think there was another line right after that. So he's adding some things from other Shakespearean plays, and but basically he's following the text and probably editing it because Shakespeare at that time was very wordy. People came in that time to hear a play, not just see it, but to hear it. It was like poetry. And again, this was when they didn't have radio or TV or the internet or anything like that. So, I asked classes, what version would you rather watch? And it's surprising, a lot of people actually go for the earlier version, basically because maybe it's more normal. But once, and actually this opening is a little over the top. And once you get to Leo and Claire doing their acting, it's pretty good. But he really was trying to do something for a new audience and bring a new dimension to it. But this is a great example of exactly the same play, exactly the same opening, exactly the same script, but how radically different that can be with two different directors. So moving on. Historically, the Duke of Saxe-Meiningen is noted for being the one who is really the first modern director. And he actually was a producer, not a director. He was from the mid-1800s, and he had money. That was what he had, and he had an artistic vision. So he got people together, and they rehearsed, and again, back to Shakespeare, because Shakespeare was kind of the standard, really, in the Western world, and did some Shakespearean productions. I think this is a clip of lithograph of Julius Caesar, of the crowd scene, and there's Julius Caesar up there, or maybe it's Mark Antony. But what he wanted was, instead of just the slapdash, rehearse and learn your lines and don't bump into furniture, he had more lengthy rehearsals, really cared about what the period was. Instead of just wearing the costumes of the day, really tried to go to the period, the togas and things like that of the period, and to try to give the crowd scenes more realism. Instead of like you're just extras milling around, really, say some real words, have a real character. So he had much more depth. And what was important about the Duke of Saxe-Meiningen was he had money, and he also toured his productions around the capitals of Europe. So at that time in the 1800s, Europe was still the center of culture. The United States was really coming into its own, and really it wasn't until the 1900s that the U.S. really had that kind of cultural prominence. So it was very important influence, and really the first, credited with being really the first modern director of the modern age. Some other great directors. A great director can change people's perception of either the space or how they view things. Meyerhold, again, a lot of really good Russian, talent. We talked about Stanislavski last chapter. This is Meyerhold, was really his director. His whole thing as a director was to be kind of an anti-director. His whole thing was, let's get rid of all the theater curtains. Let's not pretend that we're in a pretty little, magic box, and we all have to wear our tuxedos and sit in our gowns and sit in the theater. And he said, let's rip the curtains around. Let's show the bricks in the wall. Let's show it. Let's call it theater. Let's say it's theater. So he was the one that started using placards. You are watching a play. This is a love scene. Here are these people getting a fight. So he was really trying to, really limit the distance between this aesthetic distance that we talked about earlier. This distance of trying to just watch a play. I just want to watch the play. I don't really want to be, lectured to. But he was that way. And actually, it's kind of like if you're watching something on TV and somebody else is in the room and you're commenting on it, well, oh, look, this is going to happen here. It's really kind of the same thing. But instead of in a theater, you wouldn't dare say that. You wouldn't dare do that. You wouldn't make comments during it. So really, think of it as like you're watching TV and with someone is like, oh, I knew that was going to happen. Oh, I know these people are going to fall in love, or ooh, something bad's going to happen now. That kind of, interjections. He was all for that. He was like, let's take theater out in the streets. Let's do an acrobatic. This is again a lithograph, a wood cutting of one of his productions. Very gymnastic. He had his people do this very kind of gymnastic and physical training to be very physical and circus-like. But he said, let's take theater out to the street corners, and let's make it. And actually, it was called theatricalism, but it's maybe the anti-theatricalism. Who knows? He rejected typical theater, but a lot of, he was important. Not only was he a great director of the period, but he influenced several major directors after that, like Brecht for one in Germany, and I think another director who I'm going to show you in a minute. So he was an important early director. Grotowski, yeah, he was influenced by Grotowski. A lot of people from the 60s were influenced by Meyerhold too. Grotowski's thing was, he was a Polish experimental director from the 60s, and his whole thing was, let's strip theater down to its essentials. All you need is an actor and an audience. You don't need a lot of sets. So poor theater doesn't mean you don't have any money, but it means you don't need much. You need an actor that has emotional intensity and you know, limited, not much set, and you need an audience. This is a clip of one of his productions, and you can see, if you look up here, you can see these people are peering down like they're at a bullfight. And actually, it looks kind of like a toreador anyway. This guy is spilling his guts out. He's in intense emotional and maybe physical agony. So this is like the really, the confessional, gut, wrenching, emotional life. That's what he was interested in, bringing that kind of dynamic performance to theater. So the focus on the actors. And then here's I think this is a Spanish theater company, and this is Teatro Gestual, a theater of gesture, you might say, where they're looking at different shapes and looks and how you can take the human body and do different weird, cool, beautiful things with it. So I'm going to play you a clip of this too. This is what a director can do. They can, alter the way you see things, alter the space, and even alter the text. So let's find this. This is, okay, Teatro Morales. So theater can be a visual medium, very visual, but look at all the visual life that he brings to this. And this this clip here where he's doing this production also shows, goes on to the next slide, maybe or a slide or two after that. You can do theater in a found space. Actually, that's what theater space is. We'll cover that in the next chapter, which we're going to run right into this after this. But theater in a found space. So here is a theater that is being done out in nature. So that also informs the production. If someone's sitting out on the lawn watching this production of all these bodies, that's a whole thing a director can do with the space and bring the space there. All right. So we've looked at some, the growth, progression of theater from the very, very early days of the director in through modern time. And I didn't focus much on like the realistic director, because there were a lot of them, that really tried to adhere to the realistic acting styles of the Stanislavski champion. And again, you saw a little bit of that in Zeffirelli's production. That sort of the normal, good directing, but I'm looking at some places where some of the directors took it in a different place. So I think we're going to move on to the producer. And what does the producer do? Well, basically, the producer handles the business, the money. The director is basically the artistic person. And sometimes, again, in academic theater, the producer and the director are the same person because it's a low-budget operation. So what does the producer do in a big-time theater? Well, they've got to look at the money, the budget, they get the rights, they get the agents, the unions, director, staff, rental, front of house, advertising, all of that. And the whole thing about agents and unions, in big time like New York theater, you know, the unions are very powerful. I mean, they've got electricians and they've got the stagehands. And literally, if somebody drops a wrench, you know, it's like that particular, maybe the stagehands union, the electrician can't pick it up because it's supposed to be the stagehands union's job. So that kind of, you know, that kind of really tightly controlled structure can be problematic. So a good producer has to really be good with interpersonal, working out those little details, little personalities and you know, conflicts of interest, and getting all that together. And a producer can also, in big time, and this is, think, movie producing too, a producer is very powerful in the sense that they have control over the script. So they're the ones picking the script in the big time world, and that can be very powerful. So a producer is very important because it all starts again with a script, and then they hire the director. So you know, and if you'll notice, a lot of the really successful directors turn to be producers, and even the successful actors. Look at Reese Witherspoon. You know, Reese Witherspoon has had a great career as an actor, but now she's producing her own stuff. And guess who's starring in those those productions? Reese Witherspoon. So she's producing herself, and she's doing very well. She's doing very well for herself, and she does good content. But a lot of directors, so Steven Spielberg was a director, and now he was a producer. George Lucas was a director, now he's a producer. So that's kind of a next step. People want more control. Tom Hanks, I think you know who Tom Hanks is. He doesn't do a lot of directing, I don't think, or maybe producing, but for instance, he saw a one-woman show in New York about this gal, Nina Vardalos, who did a show about growing up. She was kind of a homely gal growing up in a big Greek family, which is like just about any other big big family. If it's Jewish, Italian, any big family where everybody's, you know, everybody's in each other's business, and, you know, everybody's and the whole thing is trying to get married and get family. So she did this one-woman play about it. He thought it was a great script. He bought the rights to the script and produced it, and became a film. It was called My Big Fat Greek Wedding, which you maybe don't remember, but it was a big hit. It made $100 million. And I think they did a second too. And it's the kind of really heartwarming story about sort of a, you know, kind of not a beauty queen girl, but, you know, ends up falling in love with this guy who's really handsome, and they get along, and it really works out. It was a big hit, big family show. And the producer is the one who sees the possibility in a script. So you get a lot of satisfaction out of picking something that you think is going to be popular and make money. So a producer has the artistic end as well. You know, they go hand in hand. So your goal is to produce your own movie. That's going to be your discussion board post. Excuse me. You have to decide on a genre. Do I want to do a horror movie? Do I want to do a buddy movie? Do I want to do a love story? Do I want to do a romantic comedy? Do I want to do science fiction? Do I want to do a war movie? What genre do you want to do? And then out of that genre, well, then out of that story, well, if I want to do a war movie, well, maybe I want to do a war movie where, you know, people from two different sides kind of meet, and maybe they fall in love, or maybe they have a buddy relationship or something. They have, you know, something like that. Then who would be a good actor for those roles? Maybe, well, and then who would be a director? Should I do it on location? Should I do it on the set? We don't have a lot of money. Can we do it, if we're doing a war movie, can we do it in the hills out over here and do low budget? Or do I want to get unknown actors? So there's lots of decisions involved in your producing If I got unknown actors and had a good story, I could still make money with it. If I had a good director that could direct them, and so I could save some money there. And then how would I promote it? Should I go with social media? Should I try to get print advertising? Do I want to go on Twitter? Do I want to go on TikTok? What do I want to do? You know. So also Box Office Mojo is a good place, and I've got that in your notes, that you can check and see, you know, how do war movies do? How do love stories do? You know, something. And don't be super optimistic about how much money your movie is going to make. You know, if you make a profit, call that a win, because you can use that for your next project after that to, you know, help get your other next one produced. So have fun with it, you know, and just, but again, the whole thing is anybody can do it. Unleash your mind to its potential. Just think about what would be a good story. Let me do a romantic comedy about two awkward people, you know, or let me do, you know, I don't know, who knows? It could be anything. So just go with it. All right, we're going to go on to theater spaces too. We'll just look at the theater spaces and the three basic types of theater spaces, and then the found space. So the big thing about theater spaces is that the space becomes, in a live theater production, the space becomes part of your performer, because how you see it, what you view it in, really affects the production. You know, and I think this was maybe one of the questions that I had posted in one of my classes, that, you know, if you're going to see like a big production, like, you know, Cinderella or The Lion King, you know, you saw it on a big stage with lots of talent, or maybe you could see it in just a junior high school or a middle school, you know, cafetorium with cardboard, you know, cardboard sets and costumes for blankets and things like that. It's amazing, though, that theater is still theater, and no matter what the space is. And I've seen a lot of different levels of theater, and I'm always amazed, especially with the high school and the middle school productions, how creative you can be with not much. But anyway, back to the main point. Arena. Arena is the oldest type. It's the circular. It's theater in the round. But also think back to the old campfires in primitive times when people sat around the campfire. They were huddled in a circle. Not that that's you're going to be dancing in the circle, but or dancing in the fire. But the early Greek theaters were also that was circular too. Okay, here it's like a boxing ring. Okay, so here's an example of it. I have one pulled up over here. Can you find it? Oops, I need to get out of that. Minimize that. Go here. Boom.
Theater in the round is an arena theater. By that, it means that the audience is on all sides of the action. The theater seats about 247 people, and no seat is farther than 25 feet from the center of the stage.
It's how you breathe the same air and how you are constantly engaged with the audience, no matter where you look, no matter where you turn, no matter what you have to say, there's always somebody right there looking at you, listening to you.
A lot of times.
Oh, he sounds like a real theater. It's like how you breathe the air. Now, this is a real theater guy.
When you're up on a proscenium, you're kind of, the stage lights kind of flood everyone out and you can't really see anybody. And here you can see almost the entire audience.
Everything you do is under extreme scrutiny, and it really, I feel, it hones your skills as an actor.
Every time I direct a murder here, I'm just like, well, how am I going to kill the guy and make it look real, you know, because it's not like you can cheat it. You can't, no cheating room.
One of the things about arena staging is that there are entrances, or we call them vomitorium, or bombs for short, that actually come through the audience.
You have all these great entrances and exits, but on the same side, there's constraints within that. This is the only staircase we can use up on F. We can only block one of the bombs, and that's tunnel.
One of the advantages of being in the round is that it saves money because you have less scenery.
It's always about the floor. It's about the furniture.
The reverse side of that is that you really have to pay attention to detail because your audience is so close and on all sides of you.
Everything has to be realistic. So like the London Times actually has to be the London Times.
Working in the round has some challenges to it. One is that when an actor is on stage in the round, obviously their back is to some portion of the audience at all times. So that reactions of the actor have to be more than just facial reactions. They have to be something which I always call backting.
It's pretty easy to make your face say what it is exactly that you want to say. However, the people behind you cannot see your face. And so it becomes your shoulders, your hands, your arms, your legs, your torso. Everything about you has to say exactly the same thing that your face is saying.
Okay. Pretty interesting, yeah? I think so. All of you should, at some point, try to see a something in an arena stage or in the round. It's really fascinating, and it's wonderful. It's a wonderful type of experience. I mean, so many of you are just exposed to like the proscenium theaters, but it is a lot more intimate. And a lot of the universities don't necessarily do round, but they will do the thrust stage, the three-sided stage, which also is kind of a combination between the two. So what are the pros and the cons? The pros are that it's inexpensive, and you've got this intimacy with the audience. The cons are, well, you know, maybe somebody's always back is always to the audience, and maybe the seating is limited. Even though if you stack the seats up, if you go up higher with the seats, you can get a lot of people in. Like look at a boxing ring, you know, you can get a lot of people from a close distance. So there's pluses and minuses to take into account. Okay, then we have the thrust stage, which is, again, it's the audience seats on three sides. This is a very shallow thrust, but you also have this back area that you can use for more elaborate scenery, and you can also have a fly space that goes up there, so you can drop things in if you need to. So it has kind of some of the advantages of the proscenium, but it also has some of the advantages of the intimacy of the arena stage and the closeness and the connection with the audience. I usually ask students in the class, do you like seeing other people across from you while you're watching a show? Some people do, some people don't. It's like if you're at a basketball game, you know, that's basketball seating where you've got the people across from you, you can see them too, so you're responding. If people are laughing, then you're laughing, or, you know, so some people like that kind of connection with the audience. Some people would rather just look and be in their own world. So it just depends. So let's see. I've got an example. This is from the movie Shakespeare in Love, of what their best conception of what the thrust stage is in Shakespeare's time. Let's see where that is. All right, that would be down here. Boom. Okay, now again, the cheap seats are right here. These are people down in the front. They have to stand through the whole show, and the show is going to be 2, maybe 3 hours. Maybe it goes faster. They spoke faster in those days, so 2 hours time maybe. But these are the cheap seats, and now they're the orchestra. People sit there and they get paid lots of money. You can see in a thrust how vertical the space can be. So even if nobody's that far away from the stage, we're looking from the stage, but you see how close people are, even though they're up. So you raise that, and you can still get a lot of people in a close distance.
Two households, both alike in dignity. In fair Verona, where we lay our sea. From ancient grudge break to new mutiny, where civil blood makes civil hands unclean.
Okay, so that's a primer for the what a thrust might look like in Shakespeare's time. And if you go to England, I believe they, and I haven't been there, but yes, they have a recreation of that theater space. And also, I was at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, and they do have a recreation of that stage too. So that's fairly historically accurate. So it makes for a wonderful viewing situation, and there are lots of advantages to that. But again, disadvantages might still be, you know, somebody's got their back sometimes, and maybe there's a little bit of limitation. But it's a good kind of balance between some immediacy and some, you know, audience sense of, you know, being a little bit together on it. And you can still have some of the showy stuff. However, the proscenium stage is premier. That's mostly what people see. And because you can get a lot of people in that space. Every high school auditorium and the Broadway shows are all proscenium. And you can move a lot of people if the back of the stage is big. You know, you have a lot of people, you can get a lot of people on and off. You can get sets. They can roll on and roll off. They can fly up and down on this fly loft here. So there's a lot more opportunity for different sets. And you can put an orchestra down here. The audience is all facing one direction, so you see everything. So this is definitely the preferable type of stage configuration that's used mostly. But they're all three good. You should really, if you got a chance, you should see a production in a different type of setup. The advantages, yes, good for spectacle. You can hide scene changes. Everybody's looking the same way. You can make these realistic sets. And a lot of people really like that aesthetic, that separation, that I just wanted that picture box. I want to just sit back and watch the show, and I don't have to look at anybody else. I want to just have that experience. So disadvantages, you can be far away. You might need a pair of binoculars. It's a little bit more formal, but not necessarily nowadays. Everything's kind of informal. Stadium seating is where, just like it says, if you're in a football stadium, the way the seats are raised up, you could also do that in a proscenium, as opposed to maybe like movie theater, kind of the more of a gentle rake. But it just depends. Obviously, there's advantages and disadvantages of all these forms, but the prosceniums are the one that most people are doing nowadays. Some alternatives, found spaces. Like I pointed out, that park space that we looked at before, that was a found space. Churches, and many of you have probably seen a production in a church. That's a found space. They found a church and did it in there, but it means that they're using the space that's a church as a theater venue, even if it's for a church show. Then a multi-focus, like a circus, where you got the three-ring circus. I saw a production once that people sat on hay bales in the middle of a room, and they kind of pivoted around as the action went around them. It was basically around the room. There were different areas around, and you kind of you kind of sat on your hay bale and looked around that way as people were doing their scenes. The black box is a flexible space. This is actually a black box here, even though it's brown. But all the lights up here and all these things are movable. So that means you can move the seating around and make any configuration you want. You can do round, which is set for a round or arena. You could put it on three sides and get rid of that. You could go proscenium and set all your chairs this way. And the lights are in a grid all the way across, so you can put your lights anywhere. So it's basically a flexible space, and this was created in the 1900s. Adolf Appia, I think, was, and we'll get to that when we get to design. I think that basically he had the idea of, let's just have this multi-purpose space. What a great idea, instead of a typical theater. So a lot of universities and even high schools, a well-endowed high school might have a black box, a smaller space that you do more intimate and experimental pieces, like student directing things or one acts and things like that. So that's also a good place to perform. I believe that, yes, that is everything those are kind of just a run through of the different types of space. Again, the main point is that the space that you see the show in makes a difference on your perception of it and your experience of it. So with that, we'll end. The next thing we'll go to is design later on. We will see you then. Take care.